Welcome to another episode of the Unmasked History of Scooby-Doo, the podcast where we take a deep dive into the mystery of Scooby-Doo media, getting clues through interviews with people who helped bring our favorite mystery-solving dog to life, and maybe eating some Scooby snacks along the way. I'm your host, Alexa Lawler.
Sandwich, big sandwich.
Build that sandwich high.
You're right. Politics have no place in balloon animalry.
Used to say, whoa, nobody move. My tuna fish sandwich is missing.
Well, that's a weird thing to say.
And you just clap your hands and kind of roar in a confused way. Perfect!
We are still celebrating the 10-year anniversary of Be Cool Scooby-Doo. That's right, we're back for the second Music of Be Cool themed interview this month, this time with composer Matthew Janszen. Without further ado, let's get right to the interview. First of all, thank you so much for taking the time to chat with me today.
No, of course. Happy to do it.
I typically start off with 3 questions of Scooby-Doo related trivia, if you're up for it.
Oh, gosh. Okay.
They're all related to things that you've worked on.
All right.
So, first of all, which of the following is not a Be Cool Scooby-Doo episode title? So we have A, Do Not Disturb, B, A Clue for Scooby-Doo, and C, Area 51 Adjacent.
A Clue for Scooby-Doo is not an episode.
Correct. It is a Scooby-Doo Where Are You episode. And so the second question is, can you name one classic Scooby-Doo Where Are You villain that was brought back or reimagined in Be Cool?
Oh, geez. That one I'm not going to know. I'm not going to know it. I can tell you right now, I'm not going to know it. Because I can hardly remember all the villains. You know, it all becomes a blur because you work so heavily on it, and I don't always make the connections. No, I'm not going to remember. Who was it?
There's a couple options. Could have gone with Elias Kingston, Captain Cutler, the Green Ghost / Phantom Shadows, Headless Spectre. There's a couple
I
of
was
them.
wondering the Phantom one. I was wondering that was. I should have just said it, but that's fine. No, I wouldn't have remembered.
And the last question for the trivia is, true or false, Bobby Flay's cat makes an appearance in Scooby-Doo and the Gourmet Ghost?
Oh gosh, I want to say that's true.
It is true, yes.
Okay, I remember that.
Totally.
I'll take that. I'll take that for a Friday pop quiz.
Yeah, totally. No, incredible. So to dive into the general questions, what is your relationship to Scooby-Doo? Did you grow up watching the show?
Yeah, I mean, I grew up. I wasn't a fan, like a big fan of it in terms of I was obsessed with it or anything, but I was. It was just part of the lineup of things that I had watched. I would say that it was like if it was on, I watched it, and I always liked watching it because we always had there were always reruns of the originals on around the time I was growing up. So anytime it was on, it stayed on. But it wasn't like I don't think when I was growing up that it was necessarily sort of part of my normal afternoon cartoon schedule or something. Because I remember just during the time I grew up, there's this thing called the Disney Afternoon, which it was so popular. So it's like that just was in the just basic cartoon world for us. So, watching all of those, Tailspin and Darkwing Duck and all that stuff. So those are the more vivid memories I have of the target demographic when they snatched me on the cartoons. But Scooby-Doo was always just there because it was so popular. And one of the other reasons why I used to like Scooby-Doo so much was I lived in Cincinnati, Ohio, which is where I grew up, and there's a theme park there called Kings Island. And the children's area has gone through many iterations, but at one point it was a Hanna-Barbera area, and so they had a Smurfs ride, but then they also had Scooby-Doo rides and stuff, and then they ended up expanding the Scooby-Doo part of the kids area a lot. So walking around that area, you were just immediately exposed to all the characters of Scooby-Doo. And so that was also a fond memory of how it was sort of part of my childhood and riding all of the rides that had like Scooby-Doo, or they'd have the mystery machine out and you could like take a picture in front of it and all that stuff. So yeah, it's just one of those things that I think is so timeless. It was just always around. There's always something. You'll run into something. Literally, we're just at Universal Studios the other day with my family, and we run into Scooby-Doo. So it's pretty ubiquitous sometimes.
Totally. To dive into your career, was composing something that you had always wanted to do, or did you just sort of fall into it?
It wasn't something I've always wanted to do. So I I think when I was growing up, I always wanted to be an architect, and I played music when I grew up. I played piano since I was 5. But music as a career was never really on the radar. Um, Partly because I didn't like performing much. I loved playing the piano, but I didn't like performing. It made me too anxious, and as I got older, that became even more of a problem. So I kind of knew like once college hit that I wasn't going to do music, and that wasn't for me. So I was really good at math and science. So my parents were like, you should go into engineering. Like that's a very popular, field now. And so I went into engineering and stuff. And so I was a pretty late bloomer to composing. I started writing music in college is where it all started. And it was just kind of a fun thing. Like I had a keyboard, and I was always in the band through college and high school and all that stuff. So I was in the marching band and stuff. So I was always around music all the time. And I loved being in ensembles and all that. So it was just part of it. But I started writing music in my dorm room, and I just had some ideas. And I think it actually started with like a small little piece, but then I started like getting into arranging. I remember I was like in the basketball band, and I was like, they used to hire like arrangers to make specific tunes for bands in college. And I just remember looking at them going like, I think I could do this. And so then I just started doing it for fun on the side, total music nerd thing to do. But then after I wrote a piece, I brought it to the band directors and I said, can you just take a look at this? And then they're like, oh, this is great. We should play it. And so they played it. And so it just kind of like gradually evolved into, oh, maybe composition and arranging and like, the non-performance side of music is for me. And so it was a very gradual thing. I think my wanting to do film music did start to blossom pretty quickly in college just because film music had always been there. Being in band when you're in high school and all that stuff, you play a lot of John Williams, you play a lot of film score type things, in terms of band arrangements and things like that. So film music was always kind of there. Never really thought of it as a career until I got to college and started writing some music, and then I started becoming more inspired by like what the film composers were doing, and so I started kind of experimenting with that a bit more. So it wasn't like I kind of fell into it. It was kind of a gradual like discovery. And then I was like, oh, I think this is what I want to do. And it went from there.
And what was your first job composing in the entertainment industry?
Um, Also a very gradual discovery there. It's hard to nab what the definition of job is. So it was like I think my first like major paying gig was a TV movie for Lifetime. And that was um in terms of like I got hired, I had to like submit a reel, I got hired, I wrote the music and I got paid. So that process was like back in 2011, and it was a Lifetime movie. Um it was the first time I ever had anything, I think, on television and, saw my name pop up. And so that was kind of what I would consider like the first job. There was a lot of other things I'd done prior where I had got music on television because like I interned for a guy named Mike Post who does the music for Law and Order and all that. And that was when I first came out to LA. I had won this competition, and so I got to intern with him for like a month. And so he tossed me a small little source cue. Like they're in it, the characters, Olivia Benson, all that, like they're in this like observatory or something, and so there's like space music in the background. And so Mike's like, you should do that, you should just do that cue, like because it had nothing to do with the show. It wasn't the score, it was just a piece of music in the background. And so he let me do that, and that was fun. And it got to go on air as well. It was just kind of in the background there. So but I wasn't really like paid for that. I wasn't hired to do that. So it's all these little kinds of little opportunities you get along the way as you start to learn and stuff. But eventually it led to that one TV movie that kind of really started like, okay, I'm doing this now like as a career. I think this is the start, maybe. So.
And how did you first come to work on Scooby-Doo?
Oh, that was 100% because of Jake Monaco, who is a composer friend of mine. Jake and I met through we worked for Christoph Beck at the same time. So Jake worked there much longer than I had, and he was already working. I forget how many years he was there before I came along, but that again was because of Mike Post. So when like all this kind of happened around the same time. So I was interning for Mike. I did my little Law and Order queue, and then after about a month, we were kind of done with the internship, and Mike just turned to me and said, he's like, your music. He's like, you kind of remind me a little bit of someone who used to work for me. And I was like, who? And he's like, oh, it's Christoph Beck. And I was like, yeah, cool. He's like, you want to meet him? And I was like, sure. So like that moment, he just got on the phone and just called him like in that moment. And Chris picked up and said, hey, I got a kid you should meet or whatever. And you have time to meet him. And he said, sure. And then literally that day, I drove from Burbank to Santa Monica and went to Chris's studio, and he met with me. And that's when I met Jake and Chris. And Chris talked to me for a little bit. And it wasn't like an interview or anything. It was just like a, hey, introduction, like, nice to meet you. We'll take your resume. We're not looking for anybody right now, but maybe down the line we'll have a position open or whatever. And about eight to maybe 8 to 10 months later or something like that, I did getting an email from Jake saying, hey, we're really busy. We need a second assistant in the studio. Are you available to come in? And so, yeah, I of course was like, yes. And so I came in, and I was the second assistant, and we did prep, and that's how I met Jake. And so I worked with Jake for at least a couple years with Chris, and then I ended up working for another composer in the building. His name's Mark Killian. They kind of shared a studio, and I worked with him for 5 years. So Jake and I had been in the same building for probably about seven-ish years. So we became good friends. And when Jake went off and ended up sort of getting his own work and left the assistant thing and started, obviously blossoming as his own composer, Scooby-Doo came around, and he was just really busy, and he just said, hey, I need help on this, just to write a couple cues or something like that. And so that's where we kind of came into this collaboration on Scooby-Doo. He had already set it all up by that point. He had already been into it. Like, he had wrote the main theme, and he had all these things. And like, as with many composers, we have, like, typically it's a big daunting task to write the amount of music we have to write in such a short amount of time, particularly on a television schedule. And animation is particularly difficult because it's you can get less done in a day with animation because there's more to hit, more smaller, shorter cues. It just takes longer. And so, he brought me on board to sort of start collaborating behind the scenes, and he, throw me a few cues here. He's like, I just do a couple minutes here and there and that. And then that's where the collaboration started. And I ended up working on Be Cool, for a lot of the season. And it was so much fun. So much fun. I owe Jake a lot for that one because that was a great introduction to animation, and it was just a genuinely fun show. Like, I just really thought it was hilarious to work on. So
and can we go a little bit more into the differences between composing for animation and composing for like a live action show? So like, what kind of cues would you have in a Scooby-Doo episode, for example?
well, the biggest difference between animation and live action is I'd say, generally speaking, overall, the idea of storytelling is the same. So, like, composers for film and TV are storytellers. They're storytellers first, composers second, I always say, because, like, we do it in service of something else. We're not writing concert music. We're not writing. Yes, you can make albums, and they can, people will listen to them, and now there's film music concerts and all this kind of stuff. But generally speaking, when film composers and composers write things, they're not writing it for the concert hall. They're writing it in service of a whole nother art form. And it's one cog in a much larger thing, and people can be moved by the overall thing, and then the music can become like a nostalgic part of that. So so when it comes to animation and live action, that's all pretty much the same. But I'd say the biggest differences are some technical logistical things. So, like, one, the cues tend to be, in television at least, particularly when you're dealing with like 11-minute episodes nowadays, but even 22s, like, they tend to be shorter. So you have a lot more like stings and gags, particularly in Scooby. You had a lot of stings, you had a lot of little shorter little transitional cues and stuff like that. And then you'd have like maybe a couple 1 minute maybe minute and a half cue, which would be kind of long, action sequence or something much broader than that. Um, so that's the biggest thing is there's usually like a lot, like I can sometimes do a live action movie, like an hour and a half movie, and have maybe 45 cues in that. But I mean, there are some episodes of Scooby-Doo that where we've had 30 to 60 cues in just 22 minutes. Mainly just because the way they kind of come in and out, and those are like separate defined cues, and they're very short moments, or there might be a gag or something. So I do find there's a lot more cues, and they're usually shorter. And then the other thing that's different is the sort of the syncing of the music to the picture is a little different in the sense that there's always more to hit. So the way animation can tell a story, you can get away with things with the music that you normally can't get away with live action. So like they call it Mickey Mousing, but it's like it's just essentially when you hit a lot of things in the music is actually accenting a lot of things in the story, maybe visually or character wise or whatever that you normally wouldn't do in a live action because it would maybe make it seem silly, but in animation it works, and there's something about that relationship that makes that work a little bit better. And we do it a little less than say like Looney Tunes does, but it just depends on the show. But that's probably one of the biggest differences. So when you have a lot of hit points like that, where you have to hit a lot of things, it takes a little bit more time to sort of like map out what the music's going to do and how is the music going to feel like put together in a way that doesn't feel forced, that it's actually like the piece of music is there, it's inevitable, it's supposed to be there, but it's also naturally in its musical way hitting these things that we need to address in the show. So those are kind of I think the two main differences. So like I always say, like in live action, I can usually put a bed down maybe and sit for a little longer on a cue than I can in animation. It very rarely happens where I get to like kind of settle into to an idea and like have it go for 2 minutes. That's just not like that's very rare. Maybe in a larger form animated movie, you would get a little closer to maybe what live action can do. But with these short episodes, it's like no, there's just it's constantly moving, constantly moving. So.
And when you have such specific moments and things to hit, what are you composing to? Do you have a storyboard or an animatic, or where are you in that process of building the show?
Well, normally when we score, it's color. Colors come back from the animation studio, whoever's working on it, and so we have the full episode that has been edited and ready to go. And most of the time, I'd say 90% of the time, it's a locked cut. Locked meaning they're not going to change the timing of it. They might change other things internally, animation wise or whatever, as they continue to perfect it. But in terms of the timing of it, they don't change it. And so normally when we get brought in, it's in that phase. And that's why the schedule's tight, because it's like that by that point, you have a locked cut, within a month or so, it's going to be out the door, like completely out the door. So that's why I usually have a week to work on things. But yeah, the locked cut is where we usually start. Animatics I have done, and sometimes I work from a non-locked cut. That's another thing if they're behind, or if I need a schedule change or something, I might request a non-locked cut, but then I just know that I might have to go back and fix things to make it fit the next cut. Animatics are rarer. I have worked from animatics if we have decided if I'm brought onto a project very early. Well, there's two situations. If I'm brought into a project really early and they want themes and stuff early, then we might work from animatics, or even boards, just boards or outlines. It just kind of depends. So I've been occasionally brought in on projects very early where we actually write themes and stuff before, we would even get to post-production. So I might write something and then 9 months later we revisit it. The other thing is doing songs. So if we do a song, a lot of times that has to be done either prior to boards, prior to any drawings. So I'll write the song and then they'll board to the song and then the animatic. And so that kind of the song kind of informs what they animate. Or just recently on a show I'm working on now, they had already boarded it and then they go, well, they kind of like roughly sang something in and they go, now can you make this into a song? So then I kind of tweak it to where it fits the animatic or whatever. So it's kind of anything under the sun. But when it comes to the actual scoring, it's usually locked cut, ready to go.
And a bit of a broad question, but can you walk me through the anatomy of music cues in a Scooby-Doo episode?
Oh, in Scooby, so Scooby was always and it's been a while since we did Be Cool, but if I remember right, there's always a teaser. So that would be the opening cue, which usually was a scarier, mysterious cue that introduced the villain first, and then you'd have the main title, which would then like interject that, and that'd be like set up the episode. After that, you would get into more normal everyday Scooby Q, which was just like here we are. We're going about our day, and then or they're traveling to their next assignment or whatever. And then there was always a in terms of the formulas of it, there was always a Velma explain Q, a Velma historical Q or something. So they would after they started investigating, they would talk about the villain or something that had some sort of context in the past or something, and she would explain that. And so there was always one of those cues, which was actually the cue I normally started with first, mainly because it establishes the main theme for the villain. So, they had a cue. Like there's an Aztec episode or something at one point. So like they went through and like established this story of this Aztec god or whatever. So I usually start with that cue because that like informs the whole episode. That one historical thing was always this is the theme, this is the sound of the episode. And Scooby had a different sound for every episode, depending on where they were or what the villain was. And then after that, it was all just like there was the two types of cues. There was the mystery, sleuthy kind of cue, investigative cue, and then there was the oh crap, we're being chased. Or oh, they usually had like one run in with the villain in the middle. And then after that, they go back to the sleuthy investigating, and then they'd have another run in with the villain. And then after that, once they caught the villain, there was what we always called the wrap up cue. And that was Jake's theme. And he always like we used his theme for just those moments and we tweaked it to match the style of that episode. Um, and then yeah, and then it was then the final cue, it kind of depended on the episode, how they decided to close it up. And then the end credits on Scooby, which was Jake's idea, which I kind of like it's one of those things I regretted it. Like I hated it in the moment, but I love that we did it. But he wanted a different end credits every time. And so he said, I want you to take the theme, his main theme that he had written, and we tweaked it every single episode. We tweaked it to match the style of the episode. And in the moment, I hated it because, like, gosh, after doing like a week's worth of work and you're like tired and you're exhausted and you're like, now I gotta write this stupid end credits cue, which is not necessary because everyone's gonna skip it anyways. But I used to get so angry. But like when I listen back on them, I'm like, I'm so glad we did that because it's so fun. It was so fun to like hear how they all kind of evolved over the season. So they're actually one of my favorite things to go back to sometimes and listen to. And I think it really added a nice like professional flair to the show to do that. Because we did care, but it was always one of those things that was like because on most shows, like by the time you get to the end credits, and I'm like, okay, done. Let's move on. So so yeah, that's an episode.
Honestly, those end credits paid off for me personally for sure. I love those. They're so
Oh,
fun.
great. Yeah, they were some of them were really I mean, it's hard to say like they were fun to do. Like it's just they were always a time crunch. So we were always it always felt like we were throwing them together really quickly, but they were like if we were doing them on their own without the like pressure of the time, they would have been more fun. But it was always like right at the end and it was just like right up. I think we literally did most of the end credits the day the episode was due. So we usually Jake usually had a meeting like at 2 p.m. or something. And so I'd wake up that morning and we would do the end credits like real quick and throw it in and then be like, hope you like it. Luckily we never got notes on those because I don't think the producers like they were just like, oh, that's great. Like they don't there's nothing to really give notes on at that point for the end credits. So that was one nice thing about them.
Totally. So were there any challenges with something so formulaic to make it kind of suit each episode?
No, because the writers and the creators in general did a great job with that. That was kind of their thing. Um, which is why I love what I do because I they kind of always give you a starting point. But no, every episode was so different. You know, they'd be in Tokyo one episode or Ireland one episode, or the villains would be so different. And there's like this Yeti, and that's where it's like all the inspiration always comes from that, and it comes from the villain or the locale. And so we always had a place to start, like right away. Like we just knew, like, oh, this is what this episode's going to be. We have to put in this kind of flair. I remember they did like a Norse god episode or whatever, and we're like, oh, let's find some chants or whatever, and like put that in there too. So it's like immediately the minute we got back from talking with the creators about the next episode, like there's always a place to start. So it was never a problem to. In fact, that's what made the show not stale because you can work on shows that don't have the sort of like Scooby-Doo kind of explores a lot of different areas and historical. There's always something. And but some shows don't do that, but they are formulaic. So you do end up using a lot of the same cues or you end up regurgitating things. But this was not that because of the fact that they like wanted to have a different theme every episode because every villain was slightly different. So
Totally. Taking a step back a little bit, what you mentioned piano, but what instruments do you play and what do you gravitate towards when you're composing?
I play piano and that's the one I'm always going to gravitate towards. Um the So when I sit down and I come up with a theme or something, it's going to be at the piano, like hands down. That's where I'm gonna start. So I do play a little bit of guitar and stuff like that, right back there, which I might strum on and stuff like that. But normally I'm just so piano centric that it's easier for me to work quickly if I'm using the piano.
And would you say that you have a certain musical style, or what do you infuse into the cues that you're composing that make it you?
Um, style is I do have a style. I don't know if I could describe it. I think other people probably could. Style is just one of those things that, it's a taste thing. So your style is, I don't really purposely think about infusing my style in things. The style is just there because I make the, it's a taste thing. So it's like you make a decision and you either like that decision or you don't like that decision. If you like the decision, it moves on. So every time I say I like a decision, that's my style. That's me saying like I like this. And like for instance, when I work with Jake, like we have different styles. So we would butt heads. Like I might write something and then he would go, "Oh, change this, change that, change that." And then sometimes I'd be like, "Do we have to?" Like and he was, at the time, like that was his show. So I was like, we changed it. Unless I felt very passionately about it. But again, like so then that's me kind of like adapting something he already set out because he got that gig and he set out those themes and stuff like that. So that's me kind of writing in his style for some of those cues that were his creation. That's how he got the gig. So I have to respect that. So part of like it's weird for me to even think about my style sometimes because I kind of go, we have to move in and out of so many different styles depending on if you're working for a composer or if you're doing a different show or whatever. But we all still have our thumbprint on there. It's hard to get rid of that. So it's just certain decisions that you make that eventually is ends up being your voice. And that's kind of where that comes from. So I say in general, I'm a lighter. I have a lighter tone to what I do in general. Mostly because I think I've done a lot of Christmas movies and stuff too, so I've always well suited for those. But I do have a lighter, like people like tend to hire me for the lighter family oriented, things. But I've done a horror film too, so it doesn't matter. But it is one of those things that I do have like a lighter side to what I do. I think that's why I've been hired for so many younger cartoons.
Speaking of Jake, what was that collaboration process like having different styles on the Gourmet Ghost specifically, since you were co-composers on that one, I believe?
Yeah, it was yeah, that was Jake and I had worked together for so long that at that point we had such a pretty strong shorthand. So the collaboration usually is a splitting of duties and cues that we think are more appropriate for one person or another, depending on where our skills kind of lie. And so that's kind of how that collaboration was. And we would write cue like we'd assign ourselves things within the movie. So like I'm a big like orchestral guy and positive guy. Like I have kind of a positive nature to what I write. So like for instance, when they walk into the arena, or the kitchen for the first time. And there's this like, grand orchestral like what's this and blah blah. Like that was more of an obvious like, oh Matt, you're gonna do that cue, so. And Jake is like he's a guitar guy and he's also orchestral too. He has a lot of experience with orchestra because he worked with Chris for so long. But he has a more he has like a more modern approach to what he does, and he's a bit more indie too because he just kind of comes from this singing guitar background and stuff. So it's just kind of we're always just kind of like pinpointing the cues that we think like kind of fit um our sensibilities, and then we go, and then we kind of toss things back and forth in terms of like, oh, maybe you'll start this cue and I'll finish the cue, or vice versa. And toss each other notes, and he'll send me a cue and be like, what do you think of this? And I'll be like, oh, maybe we change this. And he goes, oh, why didn't I see that? Or like, or vice versa all the time. Like, because sometimes you get so deep in the cue, he'll point things out and I go, I don't even know why I didn't see that. But you're just so deep in the process that you're sometimes it's hard to take a step back and see the obvious, thing. And we did have I remember that with the romp cue, we call them the romp cues. It's when they run, and kind of go back and forth through the maze or whatever. We had a disagreement on that one, because it could have gone either way, and it could have been a rock tune when they do that, which they've done in the past, obviously a lot. And then I was like very, very passionate about it being a bit more orchestral and like sort of Looney Tunes-esque with it. And I think either one could have worked. I just really liked what they did with some of the animation, and I felt like I didn't want to just play right through it. I really wanted to like I remember us having a long discussion about that. And it could have gone either way, and I think either one would have probably in hindsight, either one would have been fine. There's not always a right or wrong answer. We landed on like a very like intense action cue, and there's a lot of hitting of things as they kind of go back and forth and stuff like that. But I think I just really liked that sequence and wanted to kind of keep it orchestral for whatever reason.
What are the differences between being a co-composer versus composing alone versus just like coming in to provide additional music?
Um, well, I mean, composing alone is if you're composing alone, like you're obviously the lead on the show, so that it's varying degrees of stress depending on your responsibility on the show. So if you're the lead composer, then obviously you're in the hot seat, and you're responsible for the music in the show. And so that's, not only it's a fun and creative to like be the lead composer and come up with the themes, it's also higher pressure to get it to where the producers like it. Period. Co-composing is pretty much the same as that, except the stress is divided between two people, and logistically a little different. Co-composing, I did a co-compose recently too with a really good friend of mine, Brian Winslow. We did this show called Megamind Rules, and it was we both work in different systems. So he works in a program called Logic, and I work in a program called Cubase. And so we had to figure out logistically like how we were going to sort of work together, particularly if we had to work on the same cue. And so there's some logistical things that sometimes have to be figured out, and like how are we going to divide up the show? What makes the most sense? What makes the most sense for timing too? Like, can we get this done in enough time if we're not fiddling with our systems and things like that? So co-composing is again that shared responsibility, but it's also like, well, how well can you work together and get the logistics figured out? Additional writing is very different. That's where it all of a sudden deviates, because that's where you're working for someone. And my job as an additional writer at that point is to not only service the picture, but make sure that I'm writing the way the composer wants me to write. Some composers, it is a very different mindset. Some composers are well suited for it, others are not, because you have to put your ego aside. And you are going to get notes from a composer that you normally wouldn't get from a producer. You may write something that you think is perfectly fine, and the composer goes, change this, change that. And you're going to be like, ugh, why do I have to change that? When it works, it's fine. But again, it's not your show. And one, it's their style. So it's that taste thing. So, like, again, they're going to now try and insert their taste on your cue. And they have every right to do that because it's their show. So it's a very different you really have to check your ego at the door, and it's really more of a craft job because normally themes are already written. So you take the themes that they have, like Hans Zimmer's a great example of this because like everyone knows that like Hans Zimmer has this whole block in Santa Monica of composers that has worked for him on his films. And he creates these suites and all these themes, and he comes up with the overall artistic vision for the show. And then there's a lot of additional writers who take that artistic vision and actually do the craft thing of like scoring a scene using that material. So that's what it is, but it still has to sound like Hans Zimmer. Like it can't sound like the person who's writing it. Otherwise, the show or movie would end up being kind of, you know, all over the place. You want it to be consistent and have the same vibe. So additional writing is very different in that way. You have to really be able to listen to what the composer's doing, adapt yourself to fit into that and go, this is what this composer likes a lot, so I'm going to do this. And sometimes when I've had additional writers on the shows, I'm very kind of controlling of the sound. So I actually I give them rigs. I give them computers that have my system, my stuff on it, because like there's some stuff that I've worked really hard to create certain sounds for shows, and I just don't want someone who has a willy-nilly just another orchestral stuff in their computer to use what they have. It has to be what I'm using because I want all of the trumpets and I want all the strings and I want everything to always sound the same across the board. Some composers don't do that. Like it depends on the show. And there have been times, like I've worked on TV movies where I've hired additional writers and I'm a little less picky about the overall sound. And you can also be really smart about it too. So like you can have a type of show where there are certain kinds of cues. So maybe not all the cues are a certain orchestral thing. So I might assign all of the love cues to a certain composer who will do that theme. And that way, those cues, cue to cue, will always sound the same palette. So as long as you're like thematically keeping the sonic palette the same, and I'm not going to all of a sudden give a love cue to this composer over here or give it to me, whereas all of a sudden I'm going to tweak it and make it sound even different. So that's one way that I used to do, fix that problem of consistency, was just making sure that everyone's kind of working on similar subjects. They kind of own their own subject and then go from there. So
Sort of along those lines, when you're working with a property like Scooby-Doo or Looney Tunes or something like that, do you go back to the original shows or just like the history of it to get inspiration and influence for the shows that you're working on?
inspiration, yes. Um, I try not to do a lot of it. So like Looney Tunes is a better example because Be Cool was its own thing. When we did that, like they came in and even Gourmet Ghost to a degree. Like there is like a sound to Scooby-Doo, but the story kind of takes you there every time. So it's like whatever you end up writing, like you're gonna write like a sleuthy something cue, and because the different stories of Scooby-Doo kind of change depending on the locale or the villains, then you have that whole element which completely flips it on its head, anyways. So there was never really a huge need with Scooby to go back in history to figure it out because the story was just like it was just right there. When I worked on Looney Tunes, I did this show called Bugs Bunny Builders. That was different for me. They came in and they said like, "Hey, this is a new show. We want it. It was particularly for preschool." So they were like, "We want a newer sound. Like we want a sound that's unique to this show. However, we still want to pay homage to what Carl Stalling, who is the original like kind of Warner Brothers Looney Tunes composer back when." And so I did go back and I watched in a lot of Looney Tunes and I listened to what was going on there and I did a lot of research. I had a whole book on historical animation and stuff because that was just a property. I think one of the biggest differences between that property and Scooby was that property was about music. Um, it's literally called Looney Tunes, Tunes, and it was like, and one of the things that they had too was they used a lot of popular music in Looney Tunes as well of the day, and that was one of its big things. So like how music was used in Looney Tunes was like historically known, and it's very obvious. Like when people say Looney Tunes and they talk about Looney Tunes, they have a specific vision in their head and what they expect the music to do. And so I really wanted to make sure I was going to get my chops up to where they needed to be. So I did research a lot of the old Looney Tunes when I did that show. But then after I do all the research and I just like imbibe it all, I then start the show and I don't go back to it. I just go, now I have all the skills in the toolbox I need. What does this show need now? And so I changed things out. So like there's a lot more electric guitar in Bugs Bunny Builders that they didn't have, but it was a construction team, and there was something about like the main title when I did the main title for Bugs Bunny Builders, like it was like they've always had a guitar in the original because that slide up was always a guitar, but like more of a band is behind Bugs Bunny Builders. There's a drums, bass, guitar, like it's more present than like the original Looney Tunes, which was definitely more orchestral, like a small group, 12 players or something in a studio. So I kept that vibe, but then I added this band to it and all these other things. So again, you still have to service the show. So I try not to like if you need that inspiration, you take it and you go. But again, you're not trying to regurgitate what they had done in the past, unless it's a true like reboot or continuation of something. So hope that answers the question.
Totally, yeah. And so on Scooby specifically, do you have any favorite cues that you worked on?
Oh, yes. There were always I remember really liking the Wraith episode. I also really liked If You Can't Scooby-Doo the Time. I don't know. That was a really fun. I always like that fun episode I love the cue when they explained the jail, another Velma like history cue. In general, the Velma history cues, the Velma explaining cues were always my favorite because that's where the theme is kind of presented in its best form. Um, and those were I think that's why they were always the first ones I worked on. Besides the practical reason of doing them first, they were just fun. That's where you get to like kind of be the composer and come up with something new. So I always enjoyed um doing those cues. There are some times there was one action sequence I was always particularly proud of that I got to do, which was I forget the name of the episode. It'll come to me. It's the alien one. I think it's in season one. No, it's Area 51 adjacent. Area 51 adjacent, there's this massive action sequence at the end, and then the mystery machine flies, and there's just all this stuff going on. And I really remember writing that cue because it was a slog. Like it was a lot of work to get that. It was a long sequence, longer than most in Scooby. And I just remember that one took a little bit of time. It's a lot of programming to get all of that to sort of fit together. So by the time that was done, I was like, oh, that was a pretty good sequence. So I was like, I like that one. That was good. So.
And on Scooby, was there ever any cues that got completely scrapped, or was it ever like tiny tweaks?
Oh yeah, cues get scrapped all the time. That's a rewrite. Rewrites happen. That's just kind of dependent on the showrunner. That's kind of dependent on the episode, maybe, I don't know, maybe this episode's just not landing as well for us, and so you can have an off week too. We're all human beings. So yeah, there's rewrites are just part of the process. You say it all the time, which is that our job is not writing music, it's rewriting music, because that's just what we do. We service something larger than us, and you're trying to get all these personalities to work together, and personalities being the artists, the composers, the producers, the directors, all those people have opinions about what they think the music needs to do. And my job is to make everyone happy, to make sure they all get what they want and they all feel like their voice is being heard. I think that's a really important thing too. Even if you disagree with the voice, you got to make sure that they feel seen and they feel heard because they're a part of the show. And it's very egotistical and unfair of a composer to walk in and go, well, this is the best way to do something. And I will be the first to admit that there are many times I've gotten an executive note and rolled my eyes. And then after it was done, I go, oh, it was better. It's better now because they gave me that note. I had to rewrite once on a whole song. And they say, oh, we got to change the whole chorus and stuff. And of course, you're like, oh, that's a lot of work, but it's better at the end. So, and sometimes it's not. and you just let it go and you just move on and you go, well, everyone else is happy with this. There's a consensus in the room that they like the cue this way. I do not, but I'm not in charge. So sometimes you have to let that go. Luckily, that doesn't happen a ton where I like rewrite a cue and I hate it so much that I'm like, whatever, just put it in the show. Like that very rarely happens, but it does happen every once in a while. But yeah, it's just it's a mixing of personalities and everyone has to work together. And so rewriting a cue can be a very, very common thing. And I tell young composers all the time, it's an exercise I have some of my assistants do and stuff like that too, which is that it's very freeing to write something for a scene and then toss it all away. Because what it teaches you is that there's more than one way to do it. And I know, like, I remember once a friend of mine was like writing a scene, and one of the more challenging notes you can get is to speed something up or change the tempo of something because they go, oh, the director might go, it sounds too slow. And so I've seen composers, try to pull a lot of sleight of hand on something like that when genuinely the solution is to increase the tempo. If it's too slow, there are other things you can sometimes do rhythmically to make it feel faster, but sometimes the genuine solution is to just increase the tempo. But what that means is that your whole cue and sync points and everything gets thrown off. But I've shown this so many times to people where I go, just do it. Just increase the tempo and start seeing where things land again. And it's always an incredible thing to see how like, oh, this is landing fine now. And I didn't even notice this before. This is actually hitting better. And all of a sudden you're like, oh, let's just add another bar. And like it just frees you up to just let it go. Just seriously, just let the cue go. Like don't get so attached to it. I know we worked so long on it for such a long time, but the minute you just wipe it aside and start over, you all of a sudden it's an exercise to like keep scoring the same scene over and over again a different way because you'll just realize that the sky's the limit. You can keep trying new things, and it's I think we get very, as creatives, a lot of times you can get very attached to one idea because you're mostly you're scared you're never going to come up with another one. And I think that's a fear that even experienced composers get. So if you toss the whole idea, you felt really good about it. It's like it's hitting this perfectly, it's doing this, and then you toss it all away. You all of a sudden have this gut-wrenching fear that you're going to reach down in the well and there's not going to be anything there again. But it's like we all have that fear, but like for me, the rewrites are always about like you go down in the well. I am now enough in my career now. I'm far enough in my career to know I will find something down there because I always have and I will. Now, it may take longer sometimes than other jobs. Sometimes you sit down and it just like got it. And there's other times you're just like slaving over notes, just simple things because it's just not your day. Um, but I always know that I will eventually get there. I will get to where I need to be to write the cue. So that was a longer answer for rewriting, but it's a very psychological, like for a composer, rewrites are very like a very heavy like question for people. I think it's because it really does show like experience levels when how composers deal with rewrites.
Totally.
Anyways.
Were there ever any Scooby cues that you were really sad to let go of that didn't end up making it in?
Scooby was such a smooth process. I really don't think so. I think most of the cues that would have had to have been rewritten were smaller ones. Most of the larger set pieces and stuff, like I don't think we ever had to redo a thematic idea. So like whenever we came up with like the idea for the episode, I just don't think we ever got something back that said that's not going to work for this villain. Um, Scooby was really, yeah, it was just a very fun and smooth process. I think most of the cues that would have gotten thrown out were going to be the smaller ones. And normally, usually kind of dialogue heavy ones too, because those are they have a lot of exposition or something. Sometimes those are sometimes the more challenging scenes because you don't want the music to get too much in the way. And, so I think it might have been more in that frame of mind, but I'm gonna be honest, I could not mention a cue that got thrown out specifically, probably because you mentally block it out.
Was there ever anything that you kind of ran up against a time crunch wall for and you wish that you had had maybe a little bit more time to work on it?
Honestly, no. I work in television for one specific reason. It has to be finished. Like at some point, um, It's one of the things I love about television. It's also one of the things that's the most challenging is the schedule. The schedule is the schedule. It's hard. It's a grind. But one of the most positive things about television, I find, is that it forces the showrunners to be done. Like at some point, they have to stop giving you notes and they have to put it into the episode and it has to go out the door. And I absolutely love that. Like it's just there's something, and not because I want the showrunners to not be happy with the show. It's that I love the fact that like we have to get this done. And there's something particularly in the like it's so funny saying like in 2025 saying the digital age. It really ages me sometimes. But it's like there's some I grew up in at a time where digital audio I grew up with it. So it did not exist really when I was born. And as I grew up and became an adult, digital audio grew up. And so the whole idea of recording into your computer and the home studio and all that stuff was not a thing when I was a kid, and now it is. And so I always use that term digital thing. But the thing with digital and computers is that you can tweak something forever. Like it never ends. Like you can always find something to tweak or change that level here or this here and then blah, blah. You just do it for days. And it's almost debilitating. Like it's like it just freezes you because you lose sight of like the overall picture and what's important. And being a perfectionist would be like the worst thing with digital because like you can just tweak anything for days. So the reason why I like television is I'm not saying that I want the showrunners to be unhappy and rushed. It's that we all can tweak things forever. And at some point, you just have to let it go and let it out into the world. And most people aren't going to even notice maybe some of the things that were driving you crazy. And I know animators are the same way. And as I am, like, depending on the animation studio, when they send stuff back, they might be like, oh, or like there's this arm pop or all these weird things that can happen in animation. That the showrunners, it's so I'll sit in a dub sometimes, the final stage where they put music, sound effects, and dialogue together. And I'll be sitting there and the showrunners will be just twisting in their seats over some animation error. And I'll be like, I didn't even see it. Like I told him, I'm like, I have watched this show now like 50 times in a week, and I didn't even notice that. But again, and then I'll have musical things that I'm like, oh God, that violin's out of tune. But whatever, let it go. Um, and that's just part of the business. So that's why I like that quick, you know, turnaround. So I don't get too attached. I move on.
Of course, yeah. And for Scooby with the like chase romp scenes, were you involved in like lyric creation at all for some of those?
Lyrics, no. Lyrics were done by the writers. I remember there's a guy, John Coltonberry, who was like, part of the team as well. I think he did a lot of the lyrics and stuff. But usually that's the writers' room. It sends us lyrics, and then they go, "We want this to be a song." Sometimes they'll send us a song. Like sometimes they'll send us like an idea, like on the guitar or something. They'll have recorded themselves on their piano or their guitar on their iPhone, and they'll send us that and go, "We want something like this." Um, but normally the writers' room gets very inspired, and they send us things. There weren't many songs in Scooby. I two come to mind. Was I think Velma was singing in the old folks' home, and that Toe to Toe, which was the Frank Sinatra one. Um, and those lyrics were already written, and so we wrote the music around it. So we had to figure out, well, musically, how do we make this work, and what's the style and all that stuff, and then we usually record the singers if there are some or something like that. But normally the writers are involved in that. Now, on certain shows though, it's the other way. Like when I did Bugs Bunny Builders, I wrote all the lyrics and the music. So it depends on the needs of the show and like what they're trying to do, and also just the team, that sometimes the team's more musical or the team wants to write the lyrics. They think that that's going to be fun, so they do it, and then they send me that, and then I deal with the music end of it. And other times they just put in the script song about this like moment, like so and so did this. Now she's going to sing a song about how much she loves to do this, and then that's it. And then that's where I enter and write the song. So,
Cool. We're winding down into the wrap up here, I think. Why do you think that a cartoon about a mystery solving dog has lasted for over 50 years now?
well, I think, and one, I think the episodic nature of it. I there's something about TV that drives me nuts right now. Don't get me wrong, I love the 14-hour movie sometimes. It's fun. It's like the binge watch factor of that. I feel like you have to have the right story for it. And I feel like we've kind of shifted. And I think we're starting to get back to it a little bit with some shows. But like, I miss episodic television. I miss that arc. And I think there's something, and if you have the right formula, it can be really, really good and popular. And I think Scooby inherently has the right formula for episodic television. And I think the reason why it's endured is because one, the characters are well written and their personalities are well established and they did a good job because that's ultimately, I mean, think about some of the most popular shows in history. So like Friends, for instance. Why do we like Friends? Why do we like Frasier? Why do we like some of these like really ridiculously popular sitcoms? And you go, it's the characters. Like, you know, yes, the one with all the stories are interesting and they're fun, but it's because how are the characters going to react to that storyline? People tune in to those shows because they want to be with those characters. They want, in a way they kind of envision themselves as there, and it's just something to unwind to, and they wrote really well thought out characters. Scooby is that. So like every character has its own unique personality, and those personalities lend themselves very well to the storylines. And they need each one of those personality points to make the story work and to make it entertaining. You need Velma's ability to analyze something really well. You need Shaggy's comic relief with Scooby. You need all of those things. You need Fred to sort of lead the charge there. And of course, Daphne, which again, Be Cool. Woo! That was a departure for Daphne, and I was there for it. Like, she is my favorite character in Be Cool Scooby-Doo, hands down, without a doubt. Um, what a fun, kooky approach to that character. I loved it. So all the characters are they're so lovable and they all serve a really good point of story. And then I think there's just this inherent like interest in mystery. I think mystery drives a lot of stories, even when you're not watching a mystery. Why is the cliffhanger of a show so important? Why are we tuning in to the next one? Every show uses mystery to some degree to have you tune into the next show. That's what cliffhangers do. Scooby is just that, though. It's just a mystery that you get to solve at the end of the episode. And so I think there's that an inherent nature of what the show is makes it, really fun. And I think that's what makes it enduring. And I don't think that's ever going to go out of style. I think that's why Warner Brothers keeps regurgitating it every so often. They'll go, let's make a new Scooby or whatever, because that idea just doesn't get old. I kind of compare it to like other great episodic things like Star Trek is a great episodic one, even though they stopped doing episodic for a little bit. I think that they kind of went back with it with Strange New Worlds or whatever, but I'm diverging, but I'm only mentioning it because there's something about the idea of exploration, that they harnessed that idea and they did it in a form where they're like, we're going to explore something and we're going to meet some new people and then we're going to end this story. Just like Scooby's like, we're going to find a mystery, we're going to explore this mystery, we're going to solve this mystery. And I think also the whole whodunit, like, at the end, like, well, who is it when the mask comes off? I think that just drives people to stay tuned in. Um, so I think it's just a lot of components. But I do think the character, like, if you don't get the characters right, it doesn't matter what they're solving. You have to want to be with the characters, and I think that the characters are just very compelling in Scooby.
100%. Yeah. I think that covers all of the questions that I had for you. Is there anything that you wanted to talk about that I didn't ask you?
No, I mean that was very thorough. I'm trying to think back on Scooby and like what we had done, but no, I mean I think that pretty much covers it. It was a fun process to work on that. And I think that's what's kind of interesting, like tying into what you're saying, like why is Scooby-Doo so popular too? It's also just really fun to work on as an artist or a composer, particularly because it's just like they're fun episodes to sort of explore. Um, musically and see what you come up with. And the fact that they like kind of explore a different character each time was just really fun. It made it fresh every week. And it never got stale. And I'm always disappointed when the two seasons are up and you're like, let's keep going, please. Although I love that Be Cool had a little bit of a renaissance. Be Cool was the interesting about Be Cool. We all were a little bummed at its reception when it first came out because it wasn't. I think people were a little critical of it, particularly in the art style, and that was like a little bit of a bummer. Um, I'll be the first to say that no one is ever trying to ruin your childhood or your show. Like just believe that. Just believe it. Everyone's just trying to take something and find a new way to explore it. They can't just regurgitate the 1960s version every time. And just because you make a new version doesn't mean that discredits the 1960s version or the older versions. It's just it is its own standalone version. But the thing about Be Cool that I think got overshadowed by that whole, thing when it came out was it's very well written and it is hilarious. It is funny. It is legit funny. And like I said, like Daphne is my favorite character in that whole show. And I'm watching this thing cracking up while I'm scoring it and going like, "Oh, this is genius. Like this is so much fun to watch." And we just went into it with such, we were so excited about it. And I was so happy to see that after all that dust settled and it did its first run, and it came back on HBO Max, that it really found like another like renaissance and had a lot of viewership. And now all of a sudden I'm starting to see it pop up on Cartoon Network more often now and different outlets because people like came around to it and they go, wait, this is actually pretty funny. And I'm like, yeah, it is. It's great. It's great. So, you know, everybody's going to kind of disagree. It is one of the most challenging things when you work on properties that already have history to them. And it will always be, and it doesn't matter if it's Scooby. I've worked on other shows that have historical or reboots of very famous properties, and it is very challenging to find that middle ground of creating something new while also respecting the past. And, I think that ultimately all the creators and at Warner Brothers and everything, whenever they come up with a new show, they really are just trying to have fun and try something new and see if it sticks. No one is ever sitting back going, "Oh, we have to do it this way because this is how it's going to make a lot of money or this or that." They obviously want a lot of viewership. They do. But it's not that they do genuinely care a lot. Like when you get these creators on these shows, they care deeply about the franchise. They do. Absolutely. All they talk about is the franchise and the history of it and where it came from and what they're trying to do to keep it alive. And that is truly the genuine intention of the people involved in the show. So I just wanted to say that because I feel like sometimes in the internet day and age, it's very easy to sort of like pounce on a show when it comes out and there's something that's different about it that people like don't respond to. And I think that's always the challenge with shows that have expectations tied to them because of the historical significance of it. But I did love that Be Cool particularly had, I think it found some of its following later because of the fact that it is genuinely well written and it's fun to watch.
Totally. And we're coming up on the 10th anniversary now.
Oh gosh. Was it that long ago? Oh. But it's one of my favorite iterations of it, and I think it stands alone pretty well on its own. So
Absolutely. I will die on the Be Cool Scooby-Doo hill. The only thing left is do you have any recent projects, social media, websites you want to promote?
Yeah, I'm mattcomposer.com is kind of where some of my recent projects are coming up. Um I can't I am working on a project now. I cannot talk about it yet, but I am very excited about it. It is another animated show, another long running one that they're bringing back. So I'm very excited about it, and yeah, maybe that'll be another. I'll get to talk about that one later. But yeah, no, and I'd say if I want to advertise another show I've worked on that I wish people would watch more is Tiny Toons University because I think that show is really funny. And that team worked really hard on that show, and that was another one of my like favorite, non-Scooby properties that I've ever worked on, because I liked what they did with it and the sitcom approach of it and stuff. And it does air. It airs on Cartoon Network and Max still, so that's a fun one. And but yeah, that's it.
Awesome. Well, I will keep an eye out for new shows for sure. Yeah, thank you so much for taking the time to chat with me today.
No, of course. Thank you. Thank you for reaching out. This was fun. It's fun. It's fun to go back down on memory lane, particularly since Be Cool was one of the first animated projects I ever worked on, and that's kind of what started my career in animation. So it's always fun to sort of think back to like what it was like, and what we were trying to do, if we were even had our wits about us at all, or we're just throwing music at the page every day because we're like, oh my god, are we gonna get it done? So, but no, this was fun. So thanks for reaching out.
And that concludes today's episode. Another huge thank you to Matthew Janszen for taking the time to chat with me. Always stay tuned for further Be Cool love. If there's one thing about me that's certain, it's that my love for Be Cool Scooby-Doo is forever. For more Scooby content, be sure to check at Unmasked SD Podcast on Instagram or on TikTok at Unmasked SD. You can also always find the podcast at unmaskedsdpodcast.com. If you liked this episode and want to hear more, also make sure to check those social media channels or the website. Or you can listen to older episodes wherever you like to get your podcast fix. Thanks for listening, and keep an ear out for the next episode. Scooby-Doo!